Hi, my name is Roberto Gal, and the topic of my project is how to throw the perfect spiral with a football. Okay, this slide is titled My Abstract. This project, the main reason I chose this topic for this project was because I wanted to find out how football quarterbacks throw spirals. And I also wanted to find out how much science is involved with the throwing of a spiral, specifically in football. Now, I will give you advice on how quarterbacks are taught or should throw spirals according to some football players. First off, we have former University of North Dakota Fighting Hawk quarterback Danny Freund. Then we have two-time Pro Bowl fullback Max Strong. Next, Super Bowl 34 MVP Kurt Warner. 2012 NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year Robert Griffin III. After that, we have current Dallas Cowboy head coach and former Cowboy quarterback Jason Garrett. And lastly, former New Mexico State dual threat quarterback Jeff Fleming. The first slide on these former football players that I did was Danny Freund. Freund is currently the wide receivers coach for his alma mater, University of North Dakota. Okay, and these are the steps he believes you should do in order to throw a spiral. First, he says you need to put some space or air underneath the palm of your throwing hand. Next, Freund says in order to accomplish this spiral, you have to throw specifically with your fingertips. He also says you should have at least one and the maximum of 2 fingers on the laces of the football. This number that he put out of 1 or 2, he says is what he used to do when he played, but it really comes down to the comfort of the passer. Okay, now he says you should while the ball is in your throwing hand, you should be in a comfortable position near your throwing shoulder. You should also be loose in your upper body. You shouldn't be tense or tight or nervous. You should just be loose and the ball will come out more freely. Also, another interesting step that he mentioned was that you should keep your opposite arm tight to your body. And then when you release the ball, you should snap your thumb down and snap your index finger down to your opposite thigh, the opposite thigh of your throwing hand. Okay, now the last finger on the ball should be your index finger. And that index finger should cause the end result of the ball spinning and the ball hitting your target in the perfect spiral. Okay, now we have former Georgia Bulldog and Seattle Seahawk fullback who played in the NFL for the Seahawks 15 years, Max Strong. Although Mac was not a quarterback himself, he obviously played football long enough to learn how to throw a spiral. Okay, first off, you have to have the motion of your arm has to be over the top of your body. It should not be sidearm, underarm, or any other form. It should specifically be over the top. Also, keep your shoulders square to your target. You should then step towards your target wherever you're throwing. Follow through with your arm. Pop your wrist while you make the throw. As an example, he said, when you shoot a basketball, your shooting hand, if you're a righty, your right hand, you pop your wrist or flick it. That's what he said should happen after throwing the ball. And the last step he mentions is you should finish the throw with your shoulders square to your target. He said this really helps how accurate the pass will be. Now we have Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Warner. Kurt mentions that the grip of the ball depends on the comfort of the passer. There's not really a specific form that has to be done to throw the perfect spiral. He says what's really like an ultimate factor in throwing the perfect spiral is the release, like how you release the ball from your hand. He then mentions when you push down through the ball, finish your hand, and finish your throw. Your hand should end up being backwards, and which he mentions, like the back of your hand should be facing your body after you throw. And he says that's like where you get the spiral. Now we have former NFL Rookie of the Year and current Baltimore Raven quarterback Robert Griffin III. He is also known as RG3. And like Warner, like in the previous slide, he says, like Kurt Warner mentioned, RG3 says the grip of the ball is based on being comfortable. Depends on how comfortable the passer is. He then goes on to mention when you throw the ball, your wrist should be flicking. Max Strong also mentioned that previously. He then mentions at the end of the pass, you should, with your index finger of your throwing hand, you should be pointing at your target, which in his case is pointing at his receiver. And he mentions that he specifically places one finger on the laces when he throws football. And lastly, he mentions that in order to perfect the throwing of a spiral over and over again, it just takes repetition and practice. Next up, we have current Dallas Cowboy head coach Jason Garrett, who also played for the Cowboys, was a backup for Hall of Fame quarterback Troy Aikman. Okay, Coach Garrett mentions that just like almost every previous person I mentioned, that the grip of the ball depends on how comfortable the passer feels. And he mentioned when he played in the NFL that he would try to get as many fingers as he can on the laces because he felt comfortable with that. He believed that it helped him. He also mentions to be very loose, to not be tense. Being tense and tight can cause an inaccurate throw. He also mentions you should have your elbow above your shoulder, which will really help your pass become a spiral. And lastly, he mentions to make sure your hand comes down in the proper angle. Okay, lastly here we have former New Mexico State dual threat quarterback Jeff Fleming. Okay, Jeff starts with, he says you should place the tips of your fingers on the laces of a football. Obviously, he mentions just like every other person I mentioned that the placing of the fingers on the laces depends on how comfortable the passer is. He then says you should have a gap between your thumb and the index finger of your throwing hand. He then says to have the throwing hand in which you have the ball to place it near your chest. Next, relax your shoulders. He then says something interesting that has not been previously mentioned, which is to create a circle-like motion with your elbow. This circle-like motion, if you perform it, it will really perfect the spiral, the outcome of throwing a spiral. Now he says, rotate the ball with your wrist and carry it all the way through. So that basically means, like previously mentioned before, is like always finish flicking your wrist after the pass. Okay. This next slide is about the science behind the perfect spiral. In the science world, the throwing of a spiral is very much related to gyroscopic precession. Okay, gyroscopic precession is a phenomenon in which the axis of a spinning object describes a cone in space when an external torque is applied to it. This process actually makes sure that the ball is going in the right direction for it to be thrown as a spiral. The angle from which the ball is thrown indicates how the football arches as it makes its way through the air. The larger the angle, the higher the football will go into the air, which will cause a rainbow effect. The release velocity gives the ball the power or force it needs in order to travel down the field. The passer provides this energy, and the energy is then moved into the ball. Another scientific term related to the throwing of a spiral is known as gyroscopic torque. Gyroscopic torque makes sure the football rotates perpendicular to the football's horizontal axis point to point. This then reaffirms that it reaches its target. With the football wobbling, the gyroscopic aspect keeps the football traveling in the same exact direction. Okay, now, the importance of throwing a spiral for quarterbacks. So the importance of throwing a spiral in football for quarterbacks really has to do with accuracy, not power. Accuracy is really important because a quarterback could have all the power in a throw, but if he does not hit his target with a spiral pass, he will not succeed as a quarterback. So accuracy is very important, and that's why throwing a spiral is so important for quarterbacks to succeed. In this next slide, I listed my top 3 favorite NFL quarterbacks of all time. First up, my number 1 quarterback is Peyton Manning, who was a 2-time NFL champion. First time as an Indianapolis Colt, second time as a Denver Bronco. Next, I have Brett Favre, who was a Super Bowl champion with the Green Bay Packers. And then third, I have current Packers QB Aaron Rodgers, who so far has won one Super Bowl in his career. Okay. Now this is my works cited slide. And now my final message. This project truly gave me a lot of knowledge about throwing spirals that I was not aware of. It also gave me how close sports and science are. And I would like to thank Mr. Epling for allowing me to do this. I hope you enjoyed my project. Thank you.